Welcome back to week 3 of our How to ISO series. This week we're going to look at the concept of the scope of your management system, what the ISO standards mean there, how do we identify it, how do we define it, what are some of the considerations in that process, how does it affect the scale of the implementation project, and we'll look at some examples there as well. We'll also look at that concept or the phrase that does come up in the different management system standards of what's meant by the intended outcome of your management system. We advocate to our customers that it's actually really important to think about that broadly early on. We'll talk about why shortly. So let's start with the scope of the management system. What does this concept mean, and what are some of the considerations from a business perspective? So it's really, the scope of the management system is really saying, well, what are the boundaries, the physical or organisational boundaries of your management system, or that your management system is being applied to is probably more accurate. In the visual example there, yes, if we're a business with multiple divisions, we've got an important choice to make. Are we just going to apply let's use the example of a safety management system. Are we just applying it to our manufacturing division and the 2 sites within the manufacturing division, or are we applying it across all divisions within our business, the installation and maintenance division as well? And then as a result of that, is it being applied across all 6 sites of our business? Now, the ISO standards give you choice about that. They say the organisation has kind of freedom of choice about what you apply it to. There are some limitations on that, which we will talk about shortly. But from a business perspective, there's also an important decision to be made here, because it's going to affect the scale of the implementation project as well. So if we are seeking to implement this across all our safety system, across all 3 divisions, then it's going to take an increase in resources and time to achieve that effectively, versus just trying to implement it across just the manufacturing division, which will be a big enough job in its own right, but obviously not as big as trying to do this across 3 divisions and 6 sites. Okay, so our recommendation to our customers is to define your scope, or think about it, define it, get top management endorsement before you go too far, because eventually you're going to be going back to top management to seek a budget and resources to support this, and they need to understand the scale of the project. Okay, so let's look at some of the considerations. We'll start brief look at some of the considerations coming out of the ISO standard. In our How to ISO series, we're not trying to spend too much time going through clause by clause of the standards. What does each clause mean? You'll see some of that in our previous work. We're really having that broad look. So from our 20 years experience, what advice could we give you at this stage? So let's look at some of those considerations broadly. We will actually just very briefly, in all of the ISO standards, yes, clause 4.3 is where it has some requirements relating to the scope of your management system. It highlights that you need to consider any internal and external issues you identified when you evaluated the context of your organisation, or any needs and expectations of interested parties that have turned into a requirement of your management system. A plain English example would be, if it's a safety management system, the safety regulator is a valid interested party. Their expectation would be broadly that we provide a safe workplace, and we seek to identify hazards and minimise risks. That's not just their kind of personal opinion. They've actually got regulatory backing for that position. Therefore, here's an example of something that is an expectation of an interested party, but we really need to treat it as a requirement in the design of our management system. Okay, so if there's anything like that, you should consider that when you are identifying the scope of your management system. Other considerations, when we look at clause 4.3 across the different ISO management system standards, it says you need to consider activities, products and services that you perform that could impact on your environment, food safety, or other, depending on the standard you're aiming for, your intended performance essentially. Okay, that's within the clause. Even in Annex A of those standards, if you look in there, they really reinforce that, yes, it's your choice what activities, products, and services you include in your scope, but it's got to, but the little proviso they add in the annex is it's got to allow your system to be credible. So what they mean but across that is, let's look at the safety example at the bottom there. Yes, if we're a construction company, it's construction activities. Yes, there's some high risk activities there. We can't define the scope of our management system for our construction arm as simply being the scope of our management system is administrative activities performed by the administrative team and deliberately exclude our construction related activities, and that's obviously where the safety risk is. It wouldn't be seen as credible. And certification bodies do look at that as well. Similarly, with the example on the left-hand side, if we're a power plant generating electricity, seeking to define the scope of our environmental management system, we can't exclude the generation activities that have the biggest environmental impact. We can't say the scope of our management system is maintenance activities on site only. That wouldn't be credible. Right-hand side as an example, yes, if we're food safety management system, our core food manufacturing activities need to be included in the scope of the management system if it's to be credible. Or coming straight out of the clause, 4.3 in the standard 2, that could impact on our food safety performance, obviously, so we need to include that. Okay, other considerations coming out of clause 4.3, yes, the scope of your management system must be defined. We can't, if we're seeking certification of our safety system, as per the example before, we can't verbally express to the auditor, this is the scope of our management system. It must be defined. It must also be available to interested parties as well. Ultimately, if we are not just developing a safety management system for internal purposes, but we do want to be certified, the scope of certification will appear on our certificate of certification when we get to that point. I'll talk about that on the next slide, but that's another reason why it must be accurate. So as an example here, so just to keep going with that point that yes, here's our safety management system, we're seeking certification. The certification body, the auditors they send out, they'll do two things. They will carefully look at your defined statement of the scope of your management system. So number one, they'll want to make sure that's applied. So if the scope of our management system is manufacturing activities, so manufacturing, installation and maintenance of our product, let's say, I'll make it up, security systems as one example, then they will expect that your management system is actually applied across those divisions, and they will want to spend audit time looking at that, going to each division and making sure the safety management system has been fully applied across each division and even across the 6 sites there. So a couple of considerations coming out of that. Number one, yes, the scope of your management system will affect the required audit duration. But number two, yes, good auditors, if you include a division or a site in your defined scope of your management system and you want to seek certification to that scope, they will expect to see evidence across all 3 divisions and all sites there. Just from our experience too, yes, certification bodies are quite big on, what we would recommend is you define your scope of certification in a very straightforward, factual kind of way. So in the example I gave before, our safety management system is applied to manufacturing, installation and maintenance activities involved in, I'll start again. Applying our safety management system to the manufacture, installation and maintenance of security systems, if that was the example, or gates or whatever, or wind farms, whatever it might be that you're manufacturing, installing and maintaining. But by marketing, I put the little phrase marketing statements there. What I mean is certification bodies will, if we put in a bit of marketing buzzwords, they'll seek to cut that out. So if we're saying we manufacture world's best security systems, or we're Australia's leading installation organisation, for example. They'll want you to take out those kind of I've got to think of the right word, the things that don't relate to your kind of core divisions and activities there, where we're just adding in a little bit of marketing jargon, if you like. They'll expect you to take that out because they're not really there to certify that, yes, you're the world's best security system product. They're really there to certify that you've applied your safety management system to the parts of the business that you have stated you will apply it to. We'll have a look at some examples actually before we look at the intended outcome. So this is an example where we've talked about the organisation installing security systems, audio-visual systems, whatever it might be, mechanical products, whatever it might be. That's where we recommend just use the words very simply stating what you actually do. The manufacturing, installation and maintenance of X, Y and Z. Not much more. Keep it simple. That way particularly it's very clear boundaries for everyone then internally, and when you have external auditors come to site, you've kept it fairly clear for them as well. I have seen organisations where they define the scope of their system and they're kind of taking up 3 or 4 paragraphs to do that. You're just going to make it difficult for people internally to understand what this system is actually being applied to. The second example is not a bad way to state it. If we're a service provider, I've worked with some customers who provide services, consulting services or professional services, whatever that might be. Again, take that approach of stating it simply, the provision of design and engineering consulting services, whatever it might be that you provide. Some of our customers, yes, who provide professional services find this a bit harder to do, but keep it really focused on what you do and what you really want to apply your management system to. Okay, we're going to move on to this concept of the intended outcome of your system. And why are we looking at this? It is a phrase that if you get your copy of the standard, here's a little bit of homework for you. Type in the search box intended outcome, and you'll see that this phrase appears right throughout the standard. Last week, when we talked about the operational scan, it's something we probably mentioned that you could look at there too. And what we're really saying is, as a business, if we're going to implement a safety management system or a quality management system or whatever information security management system, it's important to, and we encourage our customers to do this, is to broadly identify, very broadly at this stage, what are we aiming to achieve? What are we doing this for? And we'll talk about why it's important to do that. But let's go back to our safety management system example. Well, broadly, we want to make sure we're providing a safe workplace, we're identifying and minimising hazards, we are complying with legislation, and that we have mechanisms in place to improve. Just put it in that very plain English kind of approach and at quite a broad level. Yes, it should reflect what you're aiming to improve. We encourage our customers to define this. Later on, there are requirements for setting objectives within the standard where you'll get into a bit more detail. You want to make this measurable. You want to set some actions and responsibilities for improvement, things like that. We're not going to that level yet. We're broadly looking at, well, what are we doing this for? What are we aiming to achieve? I would consult with management and also workforce representatives in that and get some sign-off endorsement from top management. It really setting, again, through all of our kind of how-to series so far, we do advocate at these early stages of implementing a system, get top management endorsement of what you're doing. And really here we're trying to get, it's really critical, we're trying to get top management endorsement to say, well, we are putting in, let's go back to our safety system example, this safety management system for these broad reasons, X, Y, and Z. It's really setting clear goalposts for everyone, but it's also getting senior management to endorse that because for a whole range of reasons. It makes that, it's giving authority to what you're trying to do. It's also getting some commitment from management because you are at some point going to need a budget and resources to make this happen. And when you can come back to say, well, here's the broad reasons we agreed that we're doing this for, that puts you in a much better position to put a business case forward. So why are we encouraging you? Again, this is not necessarily coming out of the standard. They do talk about this concept of the intended outcome, but we recommend you actually define it. Why? Well, based on our experience, the first point I've probably already said. The second point is when we do have to get into that more detail and set measurable objectives and supporting actions, etc., which is a requirement under clause 6.2 of the standard, we've already got a fair idea. We've already got the context of what we're doing this for. And it really makes it then to set objectives that support what we're broadly doing this for. And if you're very new to ISO standards, it probably sounds a little bit over the top, but I'm really mentioning this because we see many organisations, by the time they get to clause 6.2, they struggle a little bit to set meaningful objectives, or objectives that will really help them improve their safety performance over time. If we stick with the safety example just for the minute, could be the same for environment, food safety, etc. So we see organisations set some objectives that are a little bit lacking focus and direction, and 4, 5, 6 years later hasn't really helped them improve that much. And we just find this exercise of being able to come back to, okay, let's step it up a level. Broadly, what are we doing this for? What's our intended outcome? That then gives you very good insight into the kind, if this is what we're trying to improve and achieve, then here's some related objectives that relate to that. You'll also, as I just mentioned earlier too, you'll see the concept of intended outcome. ISO use that phrase right throughout the ISO standard. As an example, under clause 4.1, when we've got to identify internal or external issues that could affect the intended outcome of our safety management system. They mentioned that under 5.1, leadership, we've got responsibilities to make sure the safety system achieves its intended outcome, etc., etc. It comes up right through the standard. And by being very clear on what our intended outcome is up front, it gives real focus to all of our efforts when we're seeking to meet those other clauses, rather than different management and different internal stakeholders having different ideas about what we're trying to achieve. We've already gone through a very simple exercise to define that broadly, and then we can really focus the design of our system on that intended outcome. That's the real value. So I think that might be our last slide. Yes, it is. Thanks for listening into week 3. We hope you've got value out of it. If you've got any questions or there's any particular topics you want us to cover, let us know via our YouTube channel or on our website. Contact us via our website. Thanks for listening.